Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Sarah Lewis, an art and culture historian, curator, and author. She is the founder of Vision Justice and the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of the Humanities and Associate Professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Sarah is the author of The Unseen Truth: When Race Changed Sight in America, Harvard University Press. The bestseller, The Rise, Creativity, the Gift of Failure, and the Search for Mastery, Simon & Schuster. And the forthcoming book, Vision Justice, One World, Random House. She is the editor of the award-winning volumes Vision Justice by Aperture magazine and the anthology of the work of Carrie Mae Weems, MIT Press. Her writing has been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Artforum, and the New York Review of Books, and her work has been the subject of profiles from the Boston Globe to the New York Times. She is a sought-after public speaker with a mainstage TED Talk that received over 3 million views. Sarah received her BA from Harvard University, a Master of Philosophy from Oxford University, an MA from Courtauld Institute of Art, and her PhD from Yale University. She lives in New York City and Cambridge, Massachusetts. She has been presented with several awards. Please visit cerebralwomen.com for her expanded bio and enjoy this episode featuring Sarah Lewis. Sarah, welcome to Cerebral Women. I am super curious to hear what you have to say today. Let's start with, when did you recognize your interest in studying art, history, and culture?
Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm honored to be on the show. I have to say, I didn't intend to study art and culture. I began by wanting to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter. My grandfather was a painter. And when I got to college, I thought that would be my path, and it was. I became interested in the work of art in the world. And that became as much of a passion as the creative process remains in my life. But my grandfather put to me a set of questions about the work of art for justice that really in my 20s occupied so much of my imagination that it became my life's work. He had been expelled from a New York City high school in the 11th grade for asking why the textbooks just presented history one way. He wanted to know where the whole world was, other than the white Americans who were in those textbooks, whose images were in those textbooks. The year was 1926. And, when he received this answer from his high school history teacher that African Americans in particular had done nothing to merit inclusion, he was expelled for not accepting that answer as fact. And he created images that he knew he should have been able to find in those textbooks of all of us, of everyone in the world, Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos, Indigenous Americans, and white Americans. So when he died in college and he was an artist, catalyzed by that moment, really, I began to think about the broader implications of the genres and pictorial devices and monuments and visual culture writ large that we live with today. So that's really what began this work.
So during this transition and where you are now, right, fast forward,
Mm-hmm.
You were an artist. What type of relationship do you like to have with artists now?
Well, I really care deeply about thinking through the function of culture during periods of emergency and crisis in society. So that's much of the work that I do now. And my relationship with artists began much of this pursuit. I became friends with artists and was an artist, a painter at a young age. So I remember my first encounter with an artist who really inspired me, whose life was devoted to the practice, was Radcliffe Bailey, actually. I was in high school, I'd gone to a poetry reading. He was there, I was in Brooklyn. I think Kevin Powell introduced me to him. I was a senior about to go to college, go to Harvard, and had this nascent interest in being a painter. And so Radcliffe Bailey had this extraordinary gift for weaving together American mythology, history, and pictorial idioms. And it gave me a sense of what an individual imagination could do as it relates to speaking to a collective society. He found a language to use to speak about all of us, to us, in ways that I didn't think were possible. So he really opened my eyes wide to a whole new world. And that kind of wonder and awe is certainly what I think is central to the relationships I have with artists today that were forged from curating. First, had a curatorial position at the Tate Modern, working for Donna DeSalvo, and then at the Museum of Modern Art. Those experiences, because of the retrospectives I was working on and the collecting practices and acquisitions work and the biennial that I curated, the Site Santa Fe Biennial, and the writing really allowed me to be with artists all the time, from Mark Bradford to the late Elizabeth Murray, many photographers, painters, sculptors. And that, despite leaving a curatorial position to accept the job at Harvard as a professor, has remained a constant in my life. I see my thought partners as artists as much as I do colleagues of other kinds. Yeah. So it's a close relationship, one that inspires me to wonder and to dream and to really marvel at the capacity artists have to model for us new ways of understanding how the world could be.
As you were learning, as Radcliffe Bailey taught you, could you step back and redefine what you feel is the role of the artist?
Yeah, I want to do that, but I actually want to take it in a direction that for me is even more helpful. There's so much said about the role of the artist. I was just rereading Howard Zinn's book, Artist in Times of War. And I think that he summarizes what many feel to be the position of the artist, which is to be at a kind of remove, he calls it a transcendent position in society, right? Such that you're able to offer to a community a way of being that others might not dare inhabit or live out, but are necessary. And as Walter Benjamin has famously described, are sought after during times of emergency or crisis. But I actually wonder if we haven't misstated the position of the artist in embracing this sort of position of remove. I say that because as I now, over the past 7 years, through the work of the Vision Justice Project, which we can talk about, and also this book I have coming out this year, I've found that I feel, have overlooked how central the visual has been for establishing norms and laws in society, how central culture has been for actually shoring up so much of the history of race and racial domination. I think that there's a way that we have separated the sphere of the arts from the world of politics that has actually distorted the true sort of history of American democracy in the United States. That work is largely why I felt that I needed to move out of the museum world and into the world of writing and scholarship more deeply in order to articulate that history. and come back, of course, to museums and curatorial practices as I am starting to now.
So you've answered my next question already. I want to ask it because it's specific. And the question is, what do you feel is the purpose of art?
Well, if art had a single instrumental purpose, and we've defined it many ways to illuminate, it's one way to describe it, it would be essentially a blunt tool that it wouldn't do what we know it must, right? Which is to remake the world, to defy the imagination, to go beyond description, right? I think that art itself is a more muted word for the larger act of becoming, of which it is, in effect, a metaphor. Sort of act of writing about the arts through The Rise, my first book, which was a meditation on creativity and failure and mastery. And I came at that book after writing on art, in quotes, extraordinary artists, Lyle Ashton Harris, Mark Bradford, Carrie Mae Weems, all occupied my focus in the writing before The Rise and continue to. But in The Rise, I was thinking more deeply about what it means to create out of ruin, which is what we do all of our lives, how we actually become and how we create innovations, improbable, iconic achievements out of the seeming, discards of our attempts. And it was there that I began to realize that the word art, I think, prevents people from understanding how we all are in a constant act of creation through different means and becoming. So that's one way to answer your question.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
Oh, we're moving immediately to Black art. Ooh. Can be defined. Well, we need to get to the question of the reason you're asking the question. I taught a seminar years ago called What is Black Art? And in part, the rhetorical device there was to get people to think about, why the term Black art was becoming so popular, why there was so much attention being paid to the work being done by Black artists in this early 21st century moment, which is, I think, an echo of the moment of the Harlem Renaissance, why there's even a qualifier in front of the word art. But there's nothing new in asking, I think, the question of us all. We're really, in doing so, going back to the moment during the Harlem Renaissance where there was large debate between many major figures, including Langston Hughes, W.B. Du Bois, Adelaide Locke, Freeman Henry Morris Murray, really thinking through the question of the function of visual culture in the racial nadir of American life during this period of retrenchment and pushback against the gains after the Civil War being waged through print, through stereotype, through even just domestic items in the home that were trafficking in racist stereotypes. That question of what art should be really freighted political work onto the shoulders of Black artists. So the question became, well, can one just create art for art's sake as a Black artist? And there were various different positions on this. In that moment, the question about race and art and political aims fused through some of the answers. Du Bois, for example, felt that all art was political, right? And therefore, it must engage with questions of race and racial contestation. And some did not agree. So it's the fact that there's a question about what it actually is, I think it still speaks to this question of what we're hoping it can do in the world.
Yeah, you have me thinking. Okay. As an art and culture historian, curator, and author, what aspect of your work do you really enjoy the most?
Oh, I love discovery. And I know it's a term that sometimes people say as scholars we shouldn't use because everything is there. And to say you discover something assumes that the librarian or the archivist didn't know it was there. But there are these moments where you do feel as if it's you and no one else in the world with this object that you want everyone to see. And that for me is exciting. I think for many of us is exciting because in that moment, there's the sense of being properly used as a vessel. James Baldwin had this incredible speech turned essay called The Artist's Struggle for Integrity. And the speech really, in a way, has nothing to do with that title, even though it does when you get to the speech. But it won't for your listeners if they haven't heard it. And he gets at this idea, there's so much work involved with shutting out all the distractions that allow such that you can really go within and then to those spaces that going within allows you to access. And when you hit it, when you find that kind of treasure, when it's a new work of art, when it's a new artist, when it's a new moment in history that just hasn't been written about, that's when you know that you actually have been obedient to the assignment, in effect, of using your acquired, skill as a scholar to help move a conversation forward from generation to generation. And for me, that came recently when writing The Unseen Truth for Harvard University Press, and came across just some of the most exquisite, poignant, heartbreaking, powerful letters from two clerks in Woodrow Wilson's White House. So, period of the deep segregation in American life, the federalization of segregation for the first time in American life. And here are these two Black clerks I found who were both deeply attuned to the importance of culture for stating what policy alone would not articulate at the time. They were deeply attuned to the work of monuments, right? For creating and codifying and signaling this regime of racial domination that continued, and created the first book we have about these objects, these monuments. And these two men are Swan Marshall Kendrick and Freeman Henry Morris Murray. So these two men, I just could not believe what I was reading in the archives. So some of it will change our understanding of that very debate I was describing about art and propaganda during the Harlem Renaissance. There's this undiscussed manuscript that Freeman Henry Morris Murray wrote. He published a book called Emancipation and the Freed in American Sculpture that we know it was posthumously reviewed by Rick Powell and Stephen Nelson and many other great scholars. The draft of that book, though, is in his papers at Howard's Moreland Spangaren archive. And there we see his attempt to speak directly to Du Bois about the function of monuments and visual culture for racial contestation. And he excises Du Bois's name from this book because he's about to go after, in effect, the biggest lion in the arena, and is counseled not to do this. But because we haven't discussed that in the manuscript, it's been lost to time that really this debate about art and propaganda was catalyzed in this moment between Freeman Henry Morris Murray and Du Bois, and not Alain Locke and Du Bois alone in 1925-26. So it will change our understanding of the relationship between aesthetics and race in the 20th century, I think. But it also will speak to the role that culture played for civic actors, political actors, in the racial nadir of American life by looking at the papers of the other individual I mentioned, Swan Marshall Kendrick, who was just, we owe him such a debt of gratitude for the work he did to try to excise from American life and the newspapers, et cetera, that he was writing to, the racist stereotypes that he would call out, the work he was doing with the NAACP Correspondence Club, the way in which he was attuned to the work of culture, all in his evening and morning hours before going to the Woodrow Wilson White House, which was denying him opportunity for advancement at every turn. So these are the moments I think that really excite me. It's probably not what you were expecting. I could speak about other moments in artist studios that are exciting to me as well. But lately, it's been the archive.
Now let's switch to vision and justice.
Okay.
It all overlaps, right? The dots are all connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was that inspiration? What drove you to build this initiative to create Vision and Justice?
Vision and Justice happened organically. It is now a civic and cultural initiative that generates research and curriculum and programs that look deeply at the role visual cultures played in generating equity and justice in American life. I began the initiative after publishing with Aperture the Vision and Justice issue. I was the guest editor of that volume, and then began teaching Vision and Justice at Harvard. I'd planned the course at Harvard before the publication, but they came out back to back. The response to the issue was what made it organic. The level of interest in terms of just sales, the number of educators, K through 12, and of course, university level, writing to me from Wyoming, Kansas, places I just wasn't visiting at the time, asking how they could integrate vision and justice into their curriculum. And this was 2016, a critical inflection point, I think, for us as a society, racially, politically. And that request, to look at my inbox each day and to see these requests coming in, to see that it was being read and was known even in incarcerated settings, in seminars and maximum security prisons, I was just stunned by the breadth and the range and the impact, and felt that it was my life's work in many ways was being sort of presented to me. And so it was not something I intended to create, but it felt as if it was the most legible way for me to be contributory as a public-facing scholar and writer and curator. So it's now what has me most excited is the work we're doing in print and in practice. We are about to release the first book of the Vision and Justice book series, which I'm really thrilled. I get to co-edit with Deborah Willis and Lee Rayford, and a dream team of advisors from Henry Louis Gates Jr. to Carrie Mae Weems, Tyler Mitchell, just the list goes on. It's fantastic. So the first book is Race Stories, which is the anthology of all of the New York Times publications that Maurice Berger wrote, who we lost just far too early to COVID. And that is co-published between Aperture and the New York Times. That comes out in November of 2024. And that will be followed by 2 works by Corinne Simpson and Doug Harris. But the purpose of that volume is to really think through and to put in front of the public the lens-based practices by Black artists that have been deeply meaningful and seismic in its impact on many generations, but has not received its due in terms of scholarship. So the in-print work is well underway. And in practice, what has me really excited is being able to take the Vision and Justice course at Harvard and transform it into a course that I teach in public libraries and different venues around the country. I just sort of revived it. I began this at the Brooklyn Public Library in 2016 and 17, and at Aspen Ideas Festival, relaunched it with Hank Willis Thomas, where we really took the crowd as if they were in a seminar through the work of Images for Racial Justice in the United States, so through a set of case studies. And we'll start that at the Brooklyn Public Library again in this fall, in November.
Wonderful. I ask people that I interview, how do you feel the Black Lives Matter movement impacted us, the mission of art institutions? But their perspective is very different than yours. Considering what you've studied and what you know, you can go so deep on this, right? How do you feel the Black Lives Matter movement really impacted us? And is it a long-lasting impact? Like, what are the challenges?
Well, the aspect of this that I think is most maybe helpful for me to speak to for your listeners is how it impacted arts institutions. Yes, as someone who is steep in this work, and not only because of study, but just because of lived experience, right? I felt that I was seeing a ton of my peers meet me where I was for the first time in many ways.
Wow, that's great.
In many ways, there were lots of missed opportunities when I was at prior institutions, because I was still doing this work, right? Pre-Black Lives Matter, pre-racial reckoning, still interested in these topics, but wasn't yet met by a full range of colleagues who said, oh, we want to go there with you now. We're ready. So it got people ready. Now, why? Well, and this goes back to, I think, your first question, which is great, about the function of the artist in society. One of the main questions that culture and art puts before us is, I think, simply this: what do we owe each other in space, in public, in life, living here together? What do we owe each other? Now, I'll tell you a story that made me think about this. It might just bring it to a different register. I've been writing, and I'm writing another book for Random House. Vision Justice is the book that will come out in a couple of years, if not next year. And I really put this question to myself in a much harder way. When early in my life was I animated to think about the work of culture for justice? Because it began somewhere. It didn't just begin by wanting to be a painter and being a Black woman, right? That's not enough. So it occurred to me that there was this one moment, and I was with at the time, I was 8 or 9, my best friend at the time, I went to a school that became kind of integrated, in effect, but was largely white when I entered, all-girls private school. And she was, like me, a bit other in that she was Jewish and her hair was like cut in such a way that she looked like she had an afro. We kind of bonded over this,
That's cute.
Yeah. So we went away to her parents' house in the country. And, she came from money, the kind of money that makes me still to this day not know what her parents do. It's that kind of money. So everything was easy, so long as the labor was kept out of sight. And I arrive, and I'll never forget the morning of that weekend. I go downstairs, we're all having breakfast, and there was this jar behind me, and her mother said, if that jar offends you, we'll throw it away. And I didn't even have to turn around to know what she was talking about. It was basically a piece of Sambo art. Like, it was a racist caricature. It was a cookie jar that was fashioned in the form of a Black woman. The apron was the bottom, and in order to get the sustenance, you had to slice her open and open the jar, and her face had this sort of red-lipped, bulging eye stereotype of racist Sambo art. And I was 8 years old, right? Not with my parents. And I'm asked this question. And it's a question that is not one that should be freighted on me. But in that moment, now there are lots of things I could say about this, but the main point is the object, that work of art, that piece of culture, made clear that I had a right to be safe in that space as much as her daughter did, right? And that's very distinct from an object, right? From a silenced inner view that they're just not maybe telling me about how they see the world. An object makes a position inviolate, right? So the question was, am I comfortable with this object, with this young Black child in my home? Am I comfortable with what that says about me? And I will be if she's comfortable, right? So, but it was the object that did that. And that, I spent a lot of my childhood painting, wanting to understand the arts. I would study all kinds of work from Albrecht Dürer to you name it. But that moment stays with me because it felt that there was a level of power that I couldn't understand in the single digits, right, at age 8, that the object had in the world. And I wanted to understand why and what narratives it contained that needed to be up for discussion at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. That's really, I think, one of the earliest moments where I began thinking about this. And the Black Lives Matter movement got people to that same point of saying, okay, what do we have in our collection that is or is not making people that come into this building feel that they actually are part of the mission, feel they're part of the conversation, that they are, and that they should be part of, right? So that's one way of getting at it without talking about one institution or another. What do we owe each other?
I love that. We owe each other so much.
Yeah.
It's endless.
Yeah.
I do want to ask something. So as that 8-year-old child, if you would have looked at that jar, like just walked by it and glanced at it, do you think about what would have crossed your mind? Would there have been anything negative about it?
Oh, of course. But I knew through the kind of education and just diplomacy that's required in navigating all white spaces when you're the only Black person that I couldn't say anything if I wanted to stay there that whole weekend and feel comfortable, right?
Did it offend you? I mean, I know your parents, your surrounding, your grandfather was bringing a lot of things to light, but as an 8-year-old, if you looked at it, if an adult hadn't implied there was a negative aspect associated with it, would it have crossed your mind as being ugly or negative?
Well, I think that, what's beautiful about childhood is it really exposes a lot of the distortions that happen in the adult kind of conversations, that we have now. There was no reason to be, quote unquote, offended because the distortions of racist caricature reveal the distortion in the psyche of who's creating them so obviously that there's nothing really to do but pity the circumstance. Like, why?
Right.
It's so obvious that no person looks the way that any of these caricatures of anyone does, right? So, no, I wasn't offended. I wondered, I was just with one of my best friends from college, Sarah, and her children and parents, and we were talking about the political election. And at a certain point when we were speaking about the 45th president and how he was high up in the polls, he, bless his heart, he's 13. He said, but he's a convicted felon. I said, yes, there's a way in which childhood just reveals, And so, no, I wasn't offended. I just thought, my goodness, what's happened in the psyche here? But the point is that I was 8.
Right.
Right. So there's no education that you've had, have you, in second grade that would educate you enough to be able to discuss the history of abolition and parlor pottery that is trafficking in the different tales that are upending racial stereotypes, to know that this is an extension of that and an extension of, no, I didn't need to know any of that.
There was no need for her to even say anything.
Exactly. And there's lots more that I can say. I've been writing about it, but it was very clear to me that culture transforms actually the kind of conversation we're having now. Like, you're asking me in a way, sort of an opinion, like, how did you feel? How did it make you feel? One of the things that culture does is it takes dialogue away. It creates an arena. It actually gives you a depersonalized way to understand an event, an era, a fact, and it takes it out of your body. So it's not, okay, I felt this way. It's, this exists. This was made. This was acquired. This is in your home. Let's think about all the decisions, right? Fact-based, right, that allowed this to occur. And that's a study of history, right? It allows for a measure of a kind of objectivity, and it creates an arena out of, I think, what could just be debate. It's partially why teaching Vision and Justice, which is object-based, which is visual culture-based, is, as seen by myself, my colleagues, the students, a sort of controversy-free way to understand some of the most heinous aspects of American history. I can teach about the history of lynching without, I think, having concern in the classroom that I'm not handling it sensitively, because we're not debating whether racial terror and lynching took place. The photographs give you the evidence, right? The monument gives you the evidence. We're now in a position now of asking whether we want to be ignorant of this history or not. And that's really what the object did in that kitchen in my friend's house. It's, okay, you're part of this history, potentially. You could throw it away or not. The choice is yours.
Mm-hmm. Yes, God, this has been fabulous. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I actually hate to end the conversation. The last question I have for you is, what do you feel your mission is? What is your purpose?
I've long felt that we all are here for a purpose, and mine, I hope, is to offer light on aspects of society that we are failing to see, but must, for the work of justice for us all. Specifically, those failures are ones that I know history tells us have been best met through the work of culture. I think we often not necessarily your listeners, but I think at large, people tend to see, the visual culture as somehow a respite from life, a kind of luxury at a remove. We spoke about that at the beginning of the conversation. But truly, if there's any one thing I hope is the core to my life's work, it's imparting the understanding that culture has been really the indispensable tool that we've used to create the more just society in which we're honored to live.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
It's been great. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.